This was the biggest and most complex prisoner exchange since the end of the Cold War.
The deal that made this possible was a feat of diplomacy.
There was quite a diverse cast that played in this drama: presidents, prisoners, spies, and diplomats. You saw a swap of 24 different prisoners from 7 different countries. For quite some time, the United States wanted to get one of the prisoners, Paul Whelan, back, but the Russians didn't think that the United States had anything good to exchange. So one of the first key events that led to the exchange was a kind of little noticed arrest in December 2022, where Slovenian authorities arrested a couple posing as Argentines. The Slovenes accused them of being Russian spies. The United States made an offer: Paul Whelan for the 2 Russian illegals arrested in Slovenia. That offer was rejected by the Russians, but they did make it clear that they were willing to negotiate. After that, the State Department and the White House started discussing enlarging this deal. Even if there was not one key person that might incentivize the Russians, there might be enough of a quantity to convince them to give up Paul Whelan. So Secretary of State Anthony Blinken brought this to the White House. Broadly, the strategy was approved. Then Evan Gershkovich was arrested. He was arrested in March of 2023, accused falsely by the Russians of spying, and that completely shifted the grounds of these negotiations. The Americans were furious about the arrest of a journalist. Over sort of many months of discussions that were off and on, it became clear to the Americans that the Russians had one big prize: Vadim Krasikov, a Russian hitman who was arrested in 2019 in Germany for assassinating a former Chechen dissident in a park in Berlin. This was a man that Mr. Putin very much wanted to get back, in a way as a symbol, to sort of show his country that the Russians don't leave people behind who carry out the dirty work of the Russian state. But this presented a problem. Krasikov was not in American custody, he was in German custody. And that meant convincing the Germans to include him as part of any kind of prisoner deal. So then the United States came up with an idea that they thought might encourage the Germans to part with Krasikov. And that was seeing if Alexei Navalny, the famous Russian dissident and politician who was in prison in Russia, might be included as part of the deal. He had spent time in Germany. The Germans themselves had been very eager to get Navalny released from prison. Unfortunately, they never got to make this offer to the Russians, because in February of this year, Navalny died under suspicious circumstances. This potential prisoner exchange was now off the rails. So American officials kept working at the problem, and by this spring, the Americans got the Germans on board.
And now, their brutal ordeal is over.
What's really fascinating, of course, is that all of these final pieces of the puzzle came into place as President Biden was fighting for his political life. And so on July 21st, when he is sick with COVID, he places a call to the head of Slovenia to work out one of the final elements of the deal. And less than 2 hours later, he puts out his announcement that he was not running for re-election. It was a victory both for President Biden and for Mr. Putin. President Biden got the American prisoners home he pledged he would try to get home. And Vladimir Putin got the Russian hitman who he most wanted back in the fold.